The crowd is the ceiling. Let me say something that sounds obvious, but most people don't actually stop to think about it. If you're doing what everyone else is doing, you're easy to ignore. Not because you're bad, not because you're lazy, but because crowds blur people together, and the brain doesn't slow down to sort blur. Most ambitious people choose their path the same way. They look around and ask, what are smart people doing right now? Then they pick something that already feels safe, proven, familiar, that feels responsible. It also quietly creates invisibility, because the moment you step into a crowded lane, you stop being distinct. You become one more. Here's the uncomfortable part. Crowds don't protect you, they penalize you. When a lane is crowded, effort doesn't lift anyone up. It just keeps everyone level. You can work harder, show up earlier, stay later, and still end up in the same place, just more tired. That's not a motivation problem. That's a structure problem. This is why so many hardworking people feel stuck. They're not failing. They're surrounded by people doing the same thing at the same intensity, so nothing stands out. And when nothing stands out, recognition disappears. The market doesn't reward participation, it rewards contrast. When everyone sounds similar, looks similar, and moves similar, the brain doesn't choose, it scrolls, it forgets, it replaces. That's the crowd penalty. This is also why being reliable often keeps people invisible. Reliability matters inside systems, but visibility doesn't come from being dependable. It comes from being memorable, and crowds are the opposite of memorable. In a crowd, if you stop, someone fills the gap. If you slow down, someone speeds up. If you burn out, you're replaced. Not because you don't matter, because the lane was built that way. Here's where people get confused. They think the answer is to compete harder inside the crowd. Better content, more output, more consistency, more optimization. But optimization inside a crowded lane doesn't create visibility. It just makes you a better version of invisible. This is why following mainstream advice almost guarantees average outcomes. Not because the advice is evil, but because it sends too many people to the same place. And when too many people arrive at the same destination, value collapses. What makes this dangerous is how normal it feels. When everyone around you is struggling the same way, stagnation feels reasonable. You compare sideways instead of upward. You tell yourself, this is just how it goes. That's how ceilings become invisible. And here's the part nobody warns you about. Crowds don't just cap your income, they cap your thinking. They normalize slow growth, compromise, being unseen while working hard. So you stop asking different questions. You stop challenging the lane. You start managing expectations instead of expanding position. This is why leaving a crowded lane feels terrifying, not because it's impossible, because you lose the comfort of sameness. No shared excuses, no shared timelines, no shared definitions of success. That's the real cost most people don't want to pay. And this leads to a question most people avoid for as long as they can. If the crowd is the ceiling, why do we keep choosing it? Why does safety feel more attractive than visibility? And what actually happens when you step outside the lane everyone else is running in? Here's the part most people miss. The crowd doesn't punish you loudly. It punishes you quietly. And that's what makes the crowd penalty so hard to notice. It doesn't look like failure. It looks like functioning. You're doing okay, you're busy, you're productive, nothing is on fire, so there's no obvious reason to stop. Crowds don't trap people with pain, they trap people with normalcy. You earn enough, you survive, you keep going. And because you're not collapsing, you assume you're progressing. This is where time quietly disappears. Months pass, then years, and the work never stacks. You don't feel blocked, you feel flat, like you're moving but nothing is expanding. That's because inside a crowd, effort doesn't create lift. It only maintains position, so every day becomes about upkeep, staying relevant, staying competitive, staying afloat. This is why ambition changes shape here. You stop asking, how do I stand out, and start asking, how do I keep up? That shift is subtle, but it's everything. Because the moment you're trying to keep up, you've already accepted the ceiling. You're reacting instead of positioning. And here's the part people don't like admitting. Crowds reward obedience, not originality. They reward consistency, predictability, sameness. Not difference, not contrast, not visibility. So the more you fit in, the safer you feel, and the safer you feel, the less visible you become. This is why people in crowded lanes often become perfectionists. They polish, they refine, they optimize, because when you can't change the lane, you try to perfect your spot inside it. But perfection doesn't break ceilings, it just makes you quieter. And silence feels confusing here because you're doing everything right. You followed the advice, you stayed disciplined, you didn't quit, so the lack of movement feels unfair. But it's not unfair, it's structural. Crowds compress value, they flatten differences, they turn effort into background noise. This is why visibility feels rare. Not because people don't want to be seen, but because stepping out of the crowd means stepping out of approval. And approval is addictive. Approval tells you you're doing it the right way, even when the right way leads nowhere new. So people stay, they wait, they work harder, and tell themselves that patience will eventually be rewarded. But patience inside a crowded lane doesn't create opportunity. It just makes the wait longer. And that's where the real tension lives, because deep down, you already feel this. You just haven't named it yet, and if you sit in that tension long enough, it starts changing how you move. Inside a crowd, you slowly lose your sense of edge. You stop feeling sharp, you stop feeling dangerous, you stop feeling distinct, not because you changed, but because the environment trained it out of you. Crowds reward blending, they reward fitting in, they reward staying inside the lines. So every time you have an original thought, you soften it. Every time you feel a pull to stand apart, you second guess it. Because standing out feels risky when everyone around you looks the same. This is how ambition gets domesticated. You don't lose the desire, you lose the permission to be different, permission to be polarizing, permission to be visible. And invisibility feels safer here. When you're invisible, no one can reject you, no one can criticize you, no one can misunderstand you, so you trade visibility for comfort. That trade feels harmless at first, because nothing bad happens right away. You keep working, you keep producing, you keep showing up, so your brain says, this must be fine. But something subtle shifts. You stop expecting momentum. You stop imagining outsized outcomes. You stop thinking in leaps and start thinking in increments. That's how crowds shrink vision, not through force. Through repetition. You watch people around you struggle the same way, so your struggle feels normal. You hear the same complaints, so your frustration feels justified. You absorb the limits of the group without realizing it. This is why people in crowds often sound the same. Same language, same beliefs, same advice, same complaints, not because they copied each other intentionally, but because environments synchronize thinking, and once thinking synchronizes, visibility collapses, because nothing contrasts, nothing signals, nothing sticks. This is why crowds quietly punish originality, not directly, But socially, you feel it in the looks, in the silence, in the subtle pull back towards sameness. So most people don't leave crowds dramatically. They fade, they settle, they adapt, and call it maturity. But deep down, there's still that feeling that something is being suppressed, that you're capable of more than this lane will ever allow. That feeling isn't ego, it's awareness. And awareness is dangerous inside a crowd, because once you see the ceiling, you can't pretend it isn't there. And this is the fear that actually keeps people in the crowd. It's not failure, it's not uncertainty, it's not even risk. It's separation. Leaving the crowd doesn't just mean choosing something different, it means losing something familiar. You lose the shared language, you lose the shared complaints, you lose the comfort of knowing everyone around you understands your struggle. Inside the crowd, your frustration makes sense. Outside of it, you have to explain yourself. And that feels exposed. This is why most people don't leave crowds when they're losing. They leave only when staying hurts more than separating. Because crowds offer something subtle but powerful, psychological cover. When everyone around you is struggling the same way, your struggle feels justified. When everyone is capped, your ceiling feels normal. When progress is slow for everyone, slow progress feels acceptable. Leaving the crowd removes that cover. Suddenly there's no one to hide behind, no shared timeline, no shared excuses, no shared definition of reasonable, and that's terrifying. Because if you step outside the crowd and still don't win, there's no one to blame, no system to point at, no group to dissolve into. That's the real fear. Not visibility. Responsibility. Inside the crowd, you can say, this is just how it is. This takes time. Everyone struggles. Outside the crowd, those sentences stop working, and this is why crowds feel safe even when they're expensive. They protect you from standing alone with your ambition. This is also why people defend the crowd so fiercely. They call it realistic. They call it practical. They call it mature. But often they're really defending the comfort of not being singled out, because visibility doesn't just mean being seen, it means being separate, and separation forces clarity. You can't blend and be visible, you can't hide and be recognized, you can't stay surrounded and still stand out. That's the trade no one explains. So most people choose the crowd, not because it's better, but because it feels safer than being clearly seen. And once you see that, you start to understand why visibility is rare, not because people don't want success, but because they don't want what comes before it. And once you really see that, the crowd stops feeling neutral. You realize it's doing something to you, because staying in the crowd isn't just about safety, it's about avoiding a decision that forces you to answer something uncomfortable. If I step outside this lane and I'm still invisible, then I can't blame the crowd anymore. That's the risk most people don't want to take. Not failure, clarity. Because clarity removes excuses, clarity removes camouflage, clarity removes the ability to disappear into everyone else. And that's where the real tension lives. If the crowd is the ceiling, and leaving it means standing alone, then visibility isn't just about being seen, it's about being separate enough to be recognized. And once that lands, a question forms you can't unask. If visibility requires separation, what actually makes someone recognizable, not just different? And why do so many people try to stand out yet remain invisible? That's not a motivational question. That's a structural one. And once you feel it, you don't watch content the same way again.